Hi, I'm Claire Tompkins, the Clutter Coach, and this is the Organize Your Life podcast. I am passionate about organizing because it makes my clients' lives so much easier, more relaxed, and with more time to spend the way that they want to. In every podcast, I will talk about an organizing, decluttering, or time management concept. I'll tell you why it's important. I'll also include an action step at the end so you can start practicing right away. My specialty is chunking down these big topics so they aren't overwhelming. That's the concept for the podcast, too. I'm now done with the material from my first book, 52 Simple Ways to Get Organized. You can buy my books on my website or on Amazon. You can also view the podcast show notes on my blog. I do this podcast to connect with people, and that means you. Let me know that you're listening. Shoot me an email at claire@cluttercoach.net. I would really love to hear from you. Okay, here we go. This is podcast 88, and it's about not being able to see what's in front of you because of how it's defined or named. Naming and defining are important. They help us differentiate things from each other. We assign them attributes that contrast them with other things. But the other side of that is they become tied to those attributes and so identified with them that we can't always see them in another light. Here's how that becomes a problem. I have some clients who are makers. Boy, are they ever. They've got equipment and machinery and supplies for a huge range of activities, including forging knives. It's a challenge to find room for all this stuff and have it stored in a way that can be easily used. This is a common problem. The quantity of your stuff comes to a tipping point when you can no longer have everything you own in easy reach. That's when you have to start putting things in less than handy locations, far from where you'll use them, and maybe even needing a ladder to get to. But consider yourself lucky if you do have the space to maximize in this way. In the case of these clients, they've dedicated a room for making and crafts and another room for guests and their future children. Although we've sorted and purged out a lot from the craft room, it's becoming clear that there's not enough space for all that they want to do in there. I suggested they move to the guest room, which is much bigger than the current room. But that's the guest room, they tell me. And what about the nursery? In my book, guests don't need a huge guest room. They're only visiting, and ideally, they have not brought a whole bunch of stuff with them. The craft room, on the other hand, is used every week, sometimes every day, for activities that require space for storage and creating. As for the future baby, which isn't even a twinkle in her parents' eyes yet, she won't need much space either. Even if my client gets pregnant tomorrow, they'll have 3 more years at least in the bigger crafts room. Well, they hadn't thought about it that way. This is a great example of letting the definition of a room tell you what has to happen in there. They probably decided that this room was the guest room and future nursery the minute they moved in. And so it became set in stone. Who would think of doing crafts in the guest room? That doesn't make sense. This often happens with people's home offices. I've been shown home offices that clearly have not been used in years. Turns out the person works at the coffee table or the kitchen counter. Home office and where you work are not necessarily the same place. If you don't see that distinction, you'll persist in using a subpar coffee table office. The real office will get fixed up nicely, but the coffee table stopgap office will lack necessary supplies. I have a former client who built a lovely room in her backyard with plenty of sunlight and garden views, and she was going to use that as her office. But all her active paper and computer and other supplies were on the dining table. The garden office, turns out, was too cold. So she was unable to commit to either one. She worked at the dining table, but she went to the office to use the printer, because the printer belongs in the office. All her files were also in the real office, so she made a lot of extra work for herself and schlepped back and forth. What labels have you given things that prevent you from seeing their potential? Instead of accepting that rooms or objects are just what everyone calls them, question that. In past episodes, I've given ideas for increasing your objectivity regarding your own rooms and objects. Try to see these things in a new light and ask the obvious questions. In this case, an obvious question I asked my clients was, why not use the bigger room for the activity that requires more space? Since I don't live there, it was easy for me to judge the rooms simply by their size rather than their defined purpose. I saw clearly that the problem was not enough space, so I looked for more. What you can do right now. Think of a lack or a problem you want to solve, one that you've tried unsuccessfully to deal with. See if you can find any assumptions you've made that aren't necessarily true and are limiting your range of options. Hey, thanks for listening. I'm Claire Tompkins, the Clutter Coach. If you like the show, I'd love it if you leave a rating and review in iTunes. You can subscribe, too, so the podcast will be ready and waiting for you to listen to. You'll find the show notes on my blog at www.cluttercoach.net, and you can check out my store to find books I've written and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you're a fan of the show, you can become a patron on patreon.com for as little as $1 a month. You can find my page by going to the Patreon website, that's Patreon, and searching on Clutter Coach. I'll still post the podcast free of charge, but I've got some cool rewards for folks who want to help me make the show even better. Come back next week for a new podcast.